Hey art nerds, today we're going to do a tutorial on how to use your alcohol markers with your water-based markers. And for this tutorial we're going to be using the Ohuhu brush markers and a box of Crayola Supertips. I already have a sketch prepared in a Master's Touch mixed media sketchbook. For something like this I would recommend you work on a cellulose watercolor paper or a strong mixed media paper because you're going to be using both alcohol markers and water-based markers, and you are going to be using some watercolor techniques. I completed my sketch with a Pilot Color Eno pencil using their pink lead, so this is also going to give us our lineless technique. You're also going to want to have a small watercolor brush handy and a cup of clean water. We're starting with the Ohuhu alcohol brush markers. I went ahead and I swatched all the colors that I'm going to need, and I began by applying PB7, which is a light blue, to the tops of her eyes and to the sides of her glasses. Now I'm starting with her skin tone. We're starting with YR4, and I'm going to be using an overblend technique where we apply the color to the shadows and then blend it out a lot using the colorless blender. Different papers are going to handle the blending of these markers differently, and I have a full Ohuhu review where I talk about that a little bit more, but I find that these markers are very blendy and really lend themselves to this sort of technique. This is why you're going to want to work on a mixed media or a cellulose based paper, a heavier paper that can take a lot of ink. You guys will also notice that I am working in stages. So we did the face, then we're working down to her shoulders. This allows me to blend the color while it's still wet, so we get more color movement and more color blending. Then I go in with R9 as my blush color on the cheeks and the lips. To add a darker shadow skin tone, I'm using BR3 and applying shadow to the insides of the ears, anywhere there might be a cast shadow, and underneath the neck. So we're getting really nice soft blends with this. I'm also using BR3 to apply freckles. Once I finish coloring in the base of the skin, I'm using P3 to add some shading to it. This is a contrast color, and it's a very light sort of lilac or lavender color, so it works well for adding cast shadows. For her eyes, I'm using PB10 and BG1, so we're gonna have blue-green eyes. And for her hair, I wanted to give her green hair. She's got kind of like a funky fairy key elf thing going on. I start with GY6 to create our highlight color. Now that her eyes have had a chance to dry, I go back in with BG1 to add darker shadows to the tops of her eyes. And then I start painting, or I start coloring in her eyebrows using GY1, and I start adding some of the local color to her hair. For her sweater, I start with R10, and I'm going to leave a lot of highlight and try to blend that out using the blender. So you can see we've left a lot of the white of the page as our highlight, and then I'm going back in with the colorless blender to try and get some color movement and to try and soften the color a bit so it's not quite so strong. We don't really have a lot of pastels in the Ohuhu set, so you kind of have to make your own pastels and learn how to work with it. This could be a good set to augment with colors from other brands as you acquire them. Next, I'm adding in some shadows with another layer of R10, just to kind of build up our color. These colors are so juicy and the paper is so absorbent though, we're not really going to get the 3 layers of color that I would like to get. I've also gone in with P1 to start adding in some of the darker shadows. So I've mentioned this in a few of my other alcohol marker videos, but I really like brush markers because I feel like I can really saturate the paper as much as I want. I can get the kind of blending effects I want, and it also allows for a really nuanced application of color. So we've zoomed in and on her face, and I'm going in with G2 to start adding some shadows to her hair. On this note, if you guys are looking for more alcohol marker tutorials, I've got you covered. Everything from selecting skin tones to hair to creating blending triads that work. I have you in my alcohol marker playlist, so why don't you guys check that out. I'm also going to have all the materials we used in this tutorial, as well as links to other useful tutorials down in the description below, as well as in the cards. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but for her hair, I'm trying to let the brush do a lot of the work. As I mentioned in the field test for the Ohuhu markers, these are really bleeding markers. They're very prone to bleeding all over the place. So you want to have a really delicate hand and use them really lightly. For the shoulder straps, I used P1, so that's a dark purple. And then for the little blue flowers that are kind of surrounding her and in her hair, I'm using PB7 again. And then going back in with PB8 and adding a darker center while they're still wet so that we get a really nice diffused blend. So that's about it for the marker part of this tutorial. Next, we're going to be switching over to the Crayola Supertips. For this tutorial, you really can use any alcohol markers and water-based markers you own and happen to like. These are just the ones that I had handy and I thought would be commonly available for most artists interested in this technique. Both are very affordable. So for this part of the tutorial, I'm using Crayola Supertips. I have a white ceramic plate. I just bought it from Dollar Tree. I'm going to be using that for my color mixing. And then I have a small Sumi brush. These are very inexpensive. Any inexpensive watercolor brush should work for this part of the tutorial. If you're interested in more Crayola Supertip tutorials, I have a bunch of them here on this channel in my Crayola playlist. I'll make sure to link that down in the description below as well. So the thing about Supertips is they don't have their color names listed on them, so I can't really run you through the colors that I'm selecting for this. I can just kind of explain my thought process. I do pick them ahead of time based on the cap color, but when it comes to Crayolas, you're going to want to swatch your Crayola markers because the cap color does not always indicate the color inside the marker. So you guys can see here, I'm swatching on my same swatch sheet. I also want to point out that this video has been time-lapsed a few times. There is absolutely no way I did this in 22 minutes. I think I spent about 3 hours painting this one evening, so take your time, relax, don't try to get it done in 22 minutes. So I'm starting with a really light blue color. This is going to be used as like a shadow color for white. And I'm using my Sumi brush to watercolor it on. So what I'm doing is I'm adding it to the glasses to kind of help develop some of the sort of the reflective color to help give the indication that this is indeed glass. I've also applied a darker blue-green color and I'm painting that onto the hair just to develop some more depth and shadow to the hair. This technique is really useful if you have a few alcohol markers and you have a lot of water-based markers like the Crayola Supertips, and you don't really like your Supertips, or you don't necessarily want to do your art with just Supertips anymore, and you want to start using your alcohol markers. This is a great way to make a small collection of alcohol markers stretch a really long way very affordably, and it's also a great way to use what you already have instead of having to go out and buy more. So I'm applying kind of a purpley color, and I want to use that to shade her skin and add some more shadow to her skin. So something that's cool about alcohol markers and water-based markers is they're not going to reactivate, they're not going to react to one another. Alcohol markers are only reactive to alcohol solvents, so you can use rubbing alcohol to activate alcohol-based markers. Water-based markers are not really alcohol reactive. They are water reactive though, so you can kind of use them like watercolor or watercolor markers and use them to paint on top of your alcohol markers. So this gives you a greater range of color, and it also allows you to adjust your alcohol marker colors. In some of my other watercolor and alcohol marker videos, I talk about why I love using watercolor on top of alcohol markers. You maintain the vibrant colors that you get with your alcohol markers, but you can add more details and more nuance using your water-based markers or your watercolors. So this is a great technique. It's a lot easier than it seems, and it's one I think is just perfect for people who have a limited number of art supplies or love getting mixed media. So using that super light blue color that we used on her glasses, I'm just applying a light sort of halo around her, and this is going to kind of help place her on the paper. It's a good way to do a cheap background without actually having to draw a background. So in this tutorial, most of what I'm doing is I'm just using the Crayola markers for color adjustment. But you can use as much or as little of the alcohol markers or the water-based markers as you like. It's really up to you. If you guys are interested, I'll record more tutorials where we use alcohol markers and water-based markers in different proportions to create really cool art. So I'm going back in with that purple color. It's kind of like a red-violet, and I'm just kind of using it to paint in some shadows on her skin, like under her hair and underneath her neck. I also really want to adjust the color on her shirt, so I'm using that same sort of red-violet color and applying it heavily to her shirt to add better shadows, to add better contrast, to better model the forms, and just to create more depth with my color. So at this point, I'm going in and applying the marker directly, like to her lips. You want to wait until you're pretty finished with the piece, until you've kind of finished all the watercolor aspects that you want to accomplish, because the Supertips do have a tendency to kind of tear up the paper, so you want to kind of save that to the end. I have a tutorial where I use just Crayola Supertips. I cover a bunch of different techniques to make some really cute art, so I'll make sure I link that for you guys so you can check it out. Hopefully it'll help inspire you. I'm also going in with that sort of dark red violet kind of color, and I'm using it just to kind of do a little bit of outlining, add some more details, and also fill in some stronger areas of color on her shirt. Then I'm going into her hair and her eyes with a little bit of dark blue just to add some additional shadow. And you can finish this, you can work this as much or as little as you want. It really is up to you and what you feel is a finished piece. So I decided I wanted her hair to have more shadow, so I went in a whole bunch and added more blue-green to her hair just to create more depth. I'm also going in with kind of a light brown color just to add some more freckles to her face. I'm sorry you guys can't really see that. With Crayola Supertips, I highly recommend if you have to pull more colors, you kind of swatch as you go, because again, the caps are not really that indicative of the colors inside. So I'm just adding some more color to the flowers in her hair and kind of tightening that up just a little bit. I'm also going back into her shirt with a lighter pink and just trying to soften some of the transitions. And I'm also using the Supertips to do just a little bit of inking to kind of fill in some of those areas. You could do all of your inking with the Supertips if you want to and get a nice colored line art, or you can switch over to a pen of your preference. Okay, so that is the alcohol marker part done. That's the super tip part done. So really, you could say you're finished if you want to and leave it at a lineless style, but I want to ink this. Now, normally I would want to ink this with colored inks and really keep that vibrancy, but I was in Louisiana and had limited access to my art supplies, so I used what I had, and I'm using a Sakura Pigma FB. FB is fine brush, and this is an alcohol marker and waterproof pen. So this is one of my favorite inking pens. You guys hear me talk about it all the time, and you can find them all sorts of places from Michael's to Amazon, so you shouldn't have any trouble finding it. And what I really like about this is it has kind of a soft, small, rubbery brush tip, which allows me to deliver really nice, nuanced lines. Now, if you're looking for good colored inking pens, the Tombow Furenosuke, I believe, are really great, and they come in a bunch of different colors, and normally those are my preference for doing colored line art inking, and I've used those in a few other tutorials, and I definitely plan on reviewing them for you guys so you guys can see just why I love them so much. But we're just going to use the black ink for today. Now, part of the problem with the black ink is it's adding a lot of darker contrast to this piece. Now, fortunately, this is kind of a lighter, brighter piece, so it can definitely handle having additional darkness added, but that's a consideration you're going to want to keep in mind when you're inking your art. Do you want to go with colored line arts, or maybe a complementary colored line art, or do you want to go with a black line art? They all have their own pros and cons. When I'm inking like this, and I have a lot of inking tutorials if you guys are looking to learn how to ink your own art, but when I'm inking like this, I typically start at the face first because as my hand gets tired, I lose some of my ability to deliver nuance. So if I want to do the best job I can on the face because that's the area where if I screw up, people are going to notice it the most. Then I work my way down the piece, and if I'm working on a larger piece, I'll use a scrap sheet of like printer paper as a blotter sheet just to prevent smearing and to keep me from getting like hand oils onto my paper. Okay, so we finished inking. I'm pretty satisfied with my inks, but there's one more step I want to use for this. You absolutely don't have to do this step, or you can use different materials for this step, but I'm using a really small sumi brush, and I'm using a little bit of white gouache mixed with water, and I'm just going to add some highlights here and there. You can also use a white gel pen for this. My favorite is the Uni Signo, but honestly, white gouache allows me to deliver lines of different thicknesses. I can change the opacity by adding more water, and I can layer on top of it, and those are all things I really struggle to do when I add white highlights with gel pens. So that about wraps it up for one method for using alcohol markers with your water-based markers. As I mentioned in the video, this is a great way to really make the most of a small marker collection and to add a lot of color very cheaply. The 100 pack of Crayola Supertips is like $15 at Walmart. It's a bit more on Amazon, but they're really affordable, and they still have a lot of use in them if you know how to use them. This video was absolutely not sponsored by Ohuhu or Crayola. It was recorded of my own volition, and I want to thank my wonderful patrons on Patreon and Tips Through Coffee for helping make this possible. I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Bye, guys!